Organisation Future Ready. I'm Ayo Shokala. I'm a broadcaster and chartered civil engineer, a career I chose at the age of 9, having experienced extreme flooding and witnessed how engineering can transform communities and save lives. A career that's gone on to help achieve massive positive outcomes, from my first project that protected 5 homes from flooding to more recent projects that protected 1.25 million homes from flooding. This challenge we're facing is a time-sensitive one. We can see that in the journey to net zero and the nature and climate crisis. In fact, we're already experiencing more frequent and intense flooding and sea level rise. Let's look at the stats. There's an alarming 5.2 million homes and businesses in England at risk of flooding, and this is a figure that is rising each decade. We also see the number of properties built on floodplains looking to double by 2065 and a 0.4 to 1 metre sea level rise by 2100. If anyone remembers the summer, we had hot and dry weather and a predicted 47% reduction in rainfall by 2070. So the challenge is imminent, but I'm joined by 2 fantastic experts who are going to delve into the subject of sustainability with me. We're going to talk about it from the most holistic perspective. So we're not just going to talk about carbon footprint, we're going to talk about social, environmental, and the widest lens on sustainability, and how we can all rise to the challenge of climate change and look to make simple changes to help businesses get further on their sustainability journey. So first, I'm going to allow our guests to introduce themselves. First, Dr. Hans.
Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Victoria Hans. I'm Director of Sustainability at the Open University, and I've worked in sustainability for a quarter of a decade now, supporting universities to embed sustainability in their strategies and to deliver for our students and future generations.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. And Amy, could you kindly introduce yourself also?
My name is Amy Kumar and I'm an ESG freelancer. My background is quite varied, but my interest in ESG and sustainability began when I worked for a large supermarket chain in fresh produce buying and began to understand some of the massive climate-related challenges that businesses are facing. I have a genuine passion and interest in supporting businesses with their sustainability-related challenges and really creating a confidence within an organisation to take action.
Thank you, Amy. I am joined by the best experts, so I can't wait to get into this conversation today. So we're going to talk firstly about why sustainability is an issue for organisations. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Victoria. Why should an organisation care about the future of our planet and take steps to make a positive contribution to sustainability?
Well, there's 2 key drivers. One is the state of the planet. All of the indicators show amber and red, so we're in decline in so many areas. But the other is a much more positive one, is that there are so many opportunities to take action, to be a regenerative force for good. And industry in particular has such a role to play as they pivot to renewable energy and to sustainability as core to their core business. We will see so many changes, so much opportunity for innovation and so much potential to secure our climate safety.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. Now, Amy, so you've worked with many businesses, as you alluded to in your introduction. So you've worked with also quite small businesses. So why should it matter to those SMEs as well as these big organisations and corporations? What's their take on it?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that SMEs account for 99.9% of the UK business population. So as of January 2023, there's approximately 5.6 million private sector businesses, which is a huge amount. And what came out of the report was that the cumulative impact of SMEs is huge when added together. And as a collective, they can make such a huge impact. So every SME has an individual responsibility. Sustainability topics can often feel driven by large corporations, but there's a lot of great work that smaller businesses can do. Large corporations often have a lot of power and influence, and in a lot of cases set the precedent for SMEs to follow. But if large corporations, who more than likely have greater resources, are not doing anything, then the impact of their non-action goes far beyond them, and it can massively influence SMEs within the same industries. also not to take action. So it's important that everybody plays their part in this climate crisis.
Thank you, Amy. You're really highlighting that I didn't understand just the scale of SMEs, but actually that big corporations have to lead the way. But I have another question. As you're seeing an uptick in businesses interested in green issues, you mentioned in the Open University's recent report on ESG that customer behaviour is also the key factor to driving this. Can you go into this a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of talk going on across all industries. And as mentioned at the beginning, the challenges can be really difficult to unpick and quite complex at times. Having worked with private sector businesses, customer behaviours and demands around this subject area are definitely a driver for many businesses. So if we're thinking about, let's say, smaller and medium-sized businesses that are growing quite rapidly within their industries, they can become quite reactive in their approach to sustainability, because one day it wasn't an issue that's on their radar, and the next day they're getting a call from a customer asking for some data on their, because they want to measure their Scope 3 emissions, and there's this wide scale panic. You find the approach is quite reactive, and I think the key here to approaching this is being proactive versus reactive. It's going to be far more economical and help businesses long term if we're more proactive. And as the government feels increased pressure to increase the regulations and legislation in this area, it's going to work better for businesses in the long term if they're prepared.
Thank you, Amy. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe we see in the future organisations actually having a proactive strategy, not just reacting to the customer base. But Victoria, what roles do you think educational institutions have in this? For example, like the Open University, what role do you think you have as the director here in raising awareness, both within the business community, but actually for the general public?
Well, part of the role of universities is to support businesses of any size to be proactive and to upskill and reskill so that they're able to engage with these issues. These are not just regulatory compliance issues, although there may be legislation. These are issues which are about securing the future success of the business, about securing climate safety on the broader global arena, but also supporting local communities and the supply chain, so the customer base, the place where the organisation is located. So this presents lots of opportunities, but we need to have people who have the skills, who understand what ESG is, the environmental, social and governance elements. It's quite tricky to deal with them separately because they're so interconnected and interrelated, but it takes a little bit of practice to be able to see what those connections are. So if you imagine, we're going like a huge tanker in the ocean, we're going in one direction, and some of what we need to do to be proactive is to put the brakes on. But as we turn around, what we need to do is to have the skills and the knowledge to be able to engage whatever our sector, whatever our role, whatever our position in the organisation. So I think the role of universities is really important, and there are educational offerings available already. But part of my role and part of what we found in the ESG report is that about a quarter of businesses just are lacking the skills. So we want to be able to collaborate with those businesses to identify what exactly those skills are. There'll be some generic, some transferable skills, skills which are already present in the business, but which perhaps can be pivoted to the ESG focus, but there'll be new skills that we need to develop, and that's what we're interested in, working together with businesses to really tailor those skills, to tailor that offering, and also to enable people to learn whilst they're in employment. We don't all have time to take several years out to do a degree, but we might be able to spare a few hours every week to upskill ourselves and to really use our existing expertise to forward ESG in our organisations.
Thank you. So you're basically working to help plug those skills gap and re-equip the population, businesses, to meet the new demand, new skills that they might need for the future green economy. That's really exciting. Now, you were both involved in this report, and you've been looking how businesses are engaging with the environment, the social and the governance. So what's your take on why we need to look at this in a holistic way? And I'll start with you, Dr. Victoria.
Yeah, so if you think about how we operate already, to cope with all of the things we have to do in the day, we often break things down into smaller steps, and that's really, obvious and useful. But how life happens is it's all interconnected. And so what we need to be able to do is to take that holistic approach to look at across a whole organisation, look at different departmental objectives and help them to integrate so that we're not pulling in different directions, but that we're using those skills, those resources, those objectives, and we're delivering, we're working, we're collaborating together to deliver a shared collective good objective. So in a business, that's going to be about business success, business profitability, but we know that that's dependent on our environment. So we know that our supply chains need to be robust and resilient to climate risks. So we do need to take this integrated approach. Obviously, we have to start somewhere, and some of us can be experts in some areas, but I think an holistic approach is really essential and critical. And it's something that we're not all really practiced at. So we need to practice, we need to learn, we need to review our failures and learn lessons from those. But together, and with this holistic approach, I think we can make great strides.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. And Amy, what's your take on this importance of having that holistic approach?
Well, we know from the report that 77% of companies had employed some kind of in-house or external consultant or specialist. But whilst that's really useful for collecting data, understanding the bigger picture, the changes, in my opinion, really need to be driven at C-suite and leadership levels. Otherwise, it just becomes, like what Dr. Victoria said, a pigeonholed role within a business, and it becomes, oh, well, that's our sustainability person, they can help you with that. And I really do understand the challenges that businesses are facing. There's already 1,000,001 things to think about in their day-to-day, but it does really need to move from being a single person focus or a single team focus to a company-wide focus. And some ideas that I've seen that would really help with that are actually making your sustainability strategy part of your company-wide strategy and not something that's separate. Also setting bonus targets on these issues. Show that you're really serious about these issues. Other ideas may be having focus groups in which someone from every team can attend, and it's their role to go back to their teams and drive the change within their individual teams. So the need for a more holistic approach is going to be key moving forward. And I saw a great example in one NHS trust that I did some work for, and they developed a great scheme in recycling and repurposing old hospital equipment. But then I worked with another trust that sent all of their hospital equipment to landfill. And actually just connecting those two trusts and getting them to talk to each other and having that more connected approach, it can create better successes both in the public sector and the private sector.
That's a fantastic example of just sharing those lessons learned in the same organisation, making sure people are doing the right thing. It's also really interesting what you talk about, basically having it bedded into the permanent structure, not just as an external role or one person's job. That sounds really interesting. It sounds like a very interesting place we should be going. So how do we continue in this work? How do we move from these conversations that we're having to sustainability in actual practical action? And I'm going to start with you, Amy, because in the Open University report, you mentioned that there's a high level of engagement within ESG and sustainability within organisations, but they didn't always follow through to the strategy and the action. So what's the barrier there? What do you think might be the case behind this?
I think there could be a number of reasons. We know from the report that 71% of companies were discussing ESG weekly, but only 8% of businesses had a fully realised strategy. And I think the struggle for businesses really lies in how difficult it is to move from a talking stage to an action stage. I think it partly goes back to what we discussed in the previous question about who's owning that responsibility. It might also be the case that companies perhaps want to be seen to be doing it, so the drive isn't really there in the first place. And with those kind of businesses, the management are not fully backing the idea, so it's unlikely that it will turn into action. Another reason may be a little bit of fear-mongering around this subject. There is a lot of judgment and scrutinisation for companies that sometimes publish their targets or strategies, and perhaps they're not meeting them by the dates that they've said they would. And I think we've created, in some ways, a little bit of a blame culture around this, and there needs to be a more supportive environment for businesses, and a supportive environment for every business going on these journeys. And one of the biggest challenges that businesses might come up against is red tape and lengthy internal processes. And I saw a great example in a business that I worked for. They worked out of serviced offices, and in the winter, the heating was on high all of the time. And the company couldn't necessarily control it themselves because they were working out of serviced offices. And it got to the point where employees were opening the windows. So the heating was on, the windows were open. And I think with large organisations and sometimes medium organisations, it comes down to empowering your employees to speak up and offering an open space for them to say, this doesn't seem right, this doesn't work. And all it took in that scenario was a conversation with the office service provider to stop that. So it really just takes one or two people to ask the question, why are we doing this way? It doesn't make sense. But we really do need to encourage and empower our employees within our organisation, because often leadership and C-suite level employees are not at the front. They can't see what's happening, what's obvious and what's right in front of their eyes. So it's definitely important to empower employees in order to make change within an organisation.
Thank you, Amy. So we need to get rid of a blame culture, and we need to get people empowered to speak up when they see something happening. That's really important. But Victoria, what are your reflections when you're looking at the data? What's the things that come up for you, or what's obvious to you?
Data is a really good starting point, but I do just want to qualify that data really only is useful if it informs decision making. So data for the sake of data is not what this is about. So we're talking about using data to measure, to take a snapshot of what's happening right now so that we can analyse it and identify opportunities for change, for cost reduction, as well as carbon reduction, for instance, for enhancing biodiversity, which might mean reducing our grounds maintenance. So there's always going to be like a seesaw of costs and benefits, but it's about analysis of the data in order to inform decision making. The other critical tool to use is prioritisation. So we use something called an aspects and impacts register in environmental management. And that's where we look at all the aspects of an organisation, all of the products, the services, the activities of an organisation. And we then look at what is the impact on the environment of those products, services and activities. And if there's something that's really high impact with high visibility, that has a compliance requirement, or that reaches a large number of either suppliers or employees, then clearly that should be prioritised. But there are some other areas that conventionally we tackle in on the environmental side of ESG, which perhaps don't have that far-reaching impact, aren't core business, and that could actually be tackled by simply stopping buying things, for example, or starting to use a circular economy model of reusing or loaning items. So that's just an example, but it's when you do look at the impact of your activities, products and services that you can start to prioritise where you're going to get the most impact for the resource you put into the activity, and the outcome which you want to see. So that's really important. And obviously all of that comes from having the skills to apply that sort of prioritization matrix and to understand. And obviously smaller organizations may not have the staffing or the resourcing to do that but by collaborating either with larger organisations within the same sector or together, they'll be able to pool their resources and have a shared service or a shared consultancy or work together to upskill themselves.
That's really interesting. So to you, data is only as good as the decisions you make from it. And even if some organisations don't quite have the outfit to do this, they could do this by working together on this. Now, when it comes to finance skills and complexity, they're often highlighted as barriers to really getting action when it comes to sustainability. Victoria, could you tell me about the barriers when it comes to skills?
Yes, so how many of us today use digital technology? Well, we're communicating today through the advances in digital technology. Pre-pandemic, many of us didn't operate on a daily basis online, and so we've upskilled very rapidly because we've had to. That's sort of the same with sustainability, with carbon emissions, with nature impact. Very few of us on a daily basis know the impact in terms of carbon emissions of our choices. And so if you take that into the workplace, do we know on a daily basis the impact of our workplace decisions or our workplace operations in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of nature impact? So it's really good to say that we might be beginners in this, and that no matter the level of seniority in a business, we might all be beginners. So we might all need to start upskilling. And in the same way as those of us who are old enough to remember the first mobile phone was about the size of a brick, and you needed to pull up an aerial in order to use it, and it got warm when you were using it. Not many people had it. It was a real like, oh, can I use your mobile phone? I think that we can apply that same analogy to skills around sustainability, around ESG. So at the moment we have those experts Amy pointed to in organisations. So if the S, the sustainability word comes up, or the ESG comes up, we take it to that person. But I think quite quickly in the future, for our businesses to succeed and for us to meet those quite challenging net zero targets, it's going to be something that we can all talk about. So you can see there's a gap at the moment. So being interested and motivated to take on continuing professional development, to take on learning at any level is really important. And I think those skills, there may be a time in the future when we go to choose our lunch and we say, oh, these ingredients are high carbon, I'm going to take this option because it's low carbon. That might be the level of change that we see. We might get that literate in terms of carbon.
Wow, imagine if we had that level of carbon literacy. It sounds like we have a significant skills gap across the board, but there's a journey of CPD to help us plug that gap. But Amy, will you give us your take on the barriers when it comes to the complexity, but also on the financial element of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with complexity, and I'm sure Dr. Victoria has a point to say on this as well, that companies can often start too big without collecting all the data first and having a rich picture of what their company actually looks like. So I think with complexity, it's really about breaking it down into steps. So, for example, step one would be to look at other businesses in your industry or similar industries and see what they're measuring. Step two would be to look at and collect a year's worth of data about your business to get a baseline and a snapshot. And this is a lengthy process. It may take some time. You may have some data missing and you may have to make some assumptions, but it will enable you to get that real rich picture of your business. Step three would be to identify the quick wins. And step four is where your business can make the most significant impact, looking at that data, putting a plan in place and taking action. So always start small, I would say, in this case. Don't make it so complex. It's obviously very important to have aspirations and goals that you're aiming for, but I would say definitely start small from the complexity side of things. In terms of financials, there is funding and external support out there. If you're an SME especially, I would suggest looking to see if your local council has any energy efficiency funding or sustainable business growth grants. There's always a DirectGov page which directs you to different funding for your business to help your business become greener. And I think Dr. Victoria alluded to it earlier. Another great idea is pooling your funding together with other local businesses on green initiatives. There may be 2 local businesses that want to help clean up a local river. There's so many different things that you can do. You don't have to work in isolation as a business. You can work within your local communities and with other local businesses on these projects.
That's really insightful, and thank you both for your really robust insights on this. So we've discussed the issue, we've discussed the barriers to action, but how do we get about developing a plan? So Amy, can you explain what ESG and sustainability frameworks are?
Well, there's so many different frameworks, you could probably spend a whole session on it. But ESG reporting frameworks ESG reporting frameworks are essentially composed of guidelines, standards and principles. You have voluntary disclosure frameworks where you as a company choose to report on specific data. You have more guidance-based frameworks which are focused on providing support with specific topics, methodologies and metrics for reporting on ESG performance. There are a few frameworks targeted at larger companies that have to do some mandatory reporting due to the size of their company and their turnover. But when looking at frameworks and deciding what's appropriate for your business, I'd say first to look at your industry and what your competitors are using. But something that people don't consider when choosing a framework is considering your audience. Is it investors looking at that framework? Is it customers? Is it employees? Is it other stakeholders? They might want to see different information on your ESG initiatives. So your framework can be guided by your primary audience. But something not to miss is look at emerging regulations. They're constantly changing and being updated, and can really affect which framework that you use and that you might have to use in the future. So be vigilant with that.
That's really helpful, but are these all suitable for all organisations? Like you've touched on it, the audience, but what about the organisations?
Yes, I would say that frameworks are generally suitable for all organisations. I think that when organisations first look at frameworks, especially if you're an SME, they can seem a little bit scary. So again, I would go back to what I previously just said about looking at your industry, seeing what competitors are using, and considering your audience. They'll all guide you to what framework might be useful. But back to a previous point, just capturing and looking at the data across your organisation will be a great start, and it may be that you pick up and use a framework later on.
That makes sense. And Dr. Victoria, what forms the basis of the Open University's own sustainability plan?
Well, as a public sector organisation, I think we just need to be clear that ESG applies across all sectors, and we can tailor those requirements according to the sector. So within the university sector, actually, we have our own frameworks. We're very collegiate. We have an umbrella body which supports higher education and colleges. And we have frameworks which we've co-developed together, which are useful for the whole of the public sector. So we have a standardised carbon emissions reporting framework, and we have a league table which actually was student-led, because this is a topic of great concern to students. They want to know that they're being equipped with the skills to meet the climate crisis and to address the nature crisis. So we have a league table as well. something to point out is there are a set of transferable skills which are applicable across any sector, at any industry, any role. And if we look to public sector legislation, the Government of Wales, when it reformed, reviewed good practice on sustainability across the globe, and they created something called the 5 ways of working, and these are transferable skills which relate to long-term thinking about preventing the unintended consequences of our business decisions, collaborating together, integrating and working together to deliver integrated objectives, and be involving a diversity of stakeholders. And one of the things with that involvement way of working is to really capitalise on the equality and inclusion of a wide range of stakeholders, because a diversity of views and skills strengthens our resilience and strengthens our practice in any arena. And so I'm talking quite generally here, but if we think specifically to the digital skills, the recent sort of investment in digital skills, I feel that's a lesson that we could learn from that digital skills experience, is that we could really embed inclusivity in our upskilling and reskilling for ESG.
That's really, really robust answer and really, really illuminative. I'm really excited to see where this goes long term if people start taking lessons from what you were doing at the Open University. So we're kind of getting to part 4 of our conversation, which is all about rising to the challenge. So the report makes 3 recommendations. It's about educating, measuring and speaking up. But it focuses a lot on education and skills. So Dr. Victoria, can you tell me why it's more sustainable in the long term to develop ESG knowledge and skills within your workforce? Why is that really critical?
So lots of people require that confidence to speak up, whatever their role or seniority, and that confidence can be built by developing your knowledge base and then developing your skills, which then inform your actions around speaking up, around requiring measurements to be taken and analysing that data. So we all benefit from bringing in consultants for a period of time, but what we really know works in organisations is to develop our internal skills and capacity to embed key issues. And this is not an issue that's going away. ESG absolutely has to be embedded across the boardroom, across the executive, across all of our policies. So as an education provider, we'd like to work and collaborate with organisations to make sure we're filling that skills gap. We currently offer our Open Learn platform with a range of free courses, so they're tasters between 1 hour and 5 hours, and they're all free, so that gives an experience, some examples of what's available. Obviously, we have our formal curriculum and qualifications where people take 3 years to do an undergraduate degree or more, or a year to do a master's or more. But we also have short courses and micro-credentials, and these are designed specifically to enable and support people who are in work, who can be released for a couple of hours a week to study. So our micro-credentials are about 100 hours of learning spread across about 10 weeks. So that makes it very doable. It means that an organisation within a couple of months, 3 months, can have upskilled an employee, and then that employee can start applying those skills and practicing them. So within a year, you can have somebody who's really learned some new skills, put them into practice, and made a change within the organisation. We also have our flexible open degree where you can it's like a pick and mix, where you can pick and mix modules to curate your own degree. And I think that's really exciting because, certainly in my past, there have been modules where I've had to really work hard or haven't been as interested in. So the fact that you can curate your own degree is really great. We've also got apprenticeships. And we've got apprenticeships for senior leaders, so we're really acknowledging that lifelong learning is critical to delivering ESG. And then we've also got apprenticeships in systems thinking, and this is that holistic, all-encompassing nature. And I think anybody who's a systems thinker will really be able to get to grips with ESG very quickly. So we've got a whole range of offerings, both from the Open University, but also on our Open Learn platform, from a range of providers. And we just want to collaborate to make sure these skills gaps are closed, so we can have sector-specific training and CPD.
I mean, these are truly robust offerings, and what I love about it is that they have different levels of time commitment, so organisations can really find the right thing for them. And the pick and mix element sounds so important when you realise the research on when it comes to motivation on a subject. It's the Daniel Pink's model, where he says you have the ability to pick what you do. That autonomy of how you learn actually really makes a big difference to people's motivations. So it sounds like you've almost aligned that perfectly. I can't wait to see what happens when organisations really bed this in and they see the skills go back into their organisations and measure, more importantly, one of those 3 recommendations, the changes. Now, Amy, you also have a very important role in this because you're an experienced consultant. So what do you think people who have your role, who are consultants in ESG, what do you think they should be doing?
I think that employing external support within your organisation can be useful, both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, it can help get you going. If you're an organisation with perhaps limited financial resources, I would suggest really identifying the specific support that you need as an organisation. So that may be in the data collection stage, or you may feel that you can do data collection stage and you need some more help with strategy development, or perhaps in applying a specific framework. If you're in a larger business that needs more long-term support, I would definitely suggest employing somebody in-house. That'll be far more cost-effective. But most importantly, if you are employing an external consultant, it's important to get somebody on board that will help facilitate and provide you with the tools that you need to carry on as a business. If they're making themselves indispensable, then they're not really doing their job correctly. So whether you do this in-house or with a consultant, you have to believe that a more sustainable approach creates long-term strategic value for your business, and you have to get behind the implementation like you would with any element of your strategy, of your business strategy. So yeah, both in-house and consultants have a part to play, but really getting behind that implementation will be the thing that makes talk into action.
I love that, Amy, but what's funny is as external consultants, your objective is to make yourself unnecessary in the long term. That is the most counterintuitive model, but absolutely necessary to bed that into the organisation. I love that. Thanks, Amy. So on the measurements recommendation, why is the data so important? And I'm going to go to Dr. Victoria Hand, because you talked about data being important earlier. So why do you think it's so important here?
So data is critical so that you can target those limited resources on impactful action, and so that you can demonstrate your thinking process. So we've given some examples. We need this embedded. We need ESG embedded in core business. It's not a bolt-on. It's not something which a single department can do for a whole organisation. So it's about really spreading it across a whole organisation. And so data from every part of the organisation can help you target where you start and then how you spread out across the organisation. Data is essential, and data is also reported transparently so that we can demonstrate externally the actions that we're taking, and that's the basis for most compliance across all of ESG compliance.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. And Amy, what's your take on the data?
Well, data is the key to success. It will give you the snapshot you need to make changes. It will help you understand the gaps you need to fill and the direction you need to head in. Would you go into a finance meeting without data? Would you analyse your operations without data? It's like any other part of your business. And it will be key to baselining your current performance and measuring success, and also demonstrating that success to stakeholders and customers and investors. A lot of companies I've worked with sometimes struggle to understand where to start. But I'd say start with your financials. What are you spending money on? What are the big ticket items? Could you procure those items from a more sustainable source? Your suppliers and partners, do they have any great initiatives that you can learn from or join? Or perhaps they've collected data that will help your business. Your people, how do they travel? Where do they work? What ideas do they have? What data have they already collected within your business that you just don't know about yet? All of these are data points that you can begin collecting. They might already exist within your business, but they are a key to your success within green initiatives and sustainability.
There's no denying you've both made the case for that data and measurements. So thank you both. And finally, Dr. Hand, I would really like to hear about how you think organisations can use their platforms to speak out on issues. And I'm keen to hear about your BBC Bite-Size Regenerator example, if that's okay.
Yeah, so the Open University, if we take that as an example, our core businesses are teaching and learning, and that's informed by our research. So we have a long-standing partnership with the BBC where we co-produce a range of offerings, and we have some amazing BBC resources there. So nobody can have missed the Blue Planet 2 plastic in the ocean moment, and that transformed the sustainability sector. I was working in sustainability, and instead of having to contact a range of people, I had people emailing and ringing me the day after that was broadcast. What can we do? How can we stop single-use plastic? So the impact of the BBC co-productions is massive. We have an amazing BBC Bite-Size offering for our children, teenagers and young people, and they suffer a lot with eco-anxiety, which might be seen as part of a mental health crisis, but a lot of it stems from anxiety around nature that they are seeing for themselves and then hearing about on the news. So our BBC Bite-Size offering includes a series on regenerators. So that's where we ask some early careers people, how are you making your job green? And it was amazing. We interviewed 10, there were many more that we looked at, but we interviewed 10 amazing young individuals who work in 10 very different roles, but they were all making their own roles green in their own ways. So that ranged from automotive engineering to the NHS, to graphic design and creatives. So I find that very inspirational, and I think employers are looking for graduates and looking to the future. So it's really important that organisations of any size keep an eye on what's important to our youth.
You've hit the nail on the head on the use of media to really inspire young people, but also to make them feel calmer, because I think once you have a sense of the solution and being part of the solution, you can kind of curb that anxiety. So I'm really excited to see more projects like that. You can see the benefits of it already, like you mentioned in those examples, and it's exemplary. But this kind of draws us towards the end of our conversations, and we've had an exciting conversation. We've talked about ESG in the broadest sense. We talked about the environment, we talked about social, we talked about governance, we talked about the importance of data and really driving into that detail to make that change. You've given some fantastic solutions. Businesses working together to harness their financial resources to small, medium enterprises really make the change required to remove some of those barriers to getting that sustainability action. I cannot recommend anyone more reading the report, and the report can be downloaded from the link shown on the screen. So I would recommend everyone reading that and really developing a plan for their own organisation about how they can play their part in the Rising Challenge. But first, I have to say big thank you to Dr. Han and Amy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation half as much as I have.